Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Experts Podcast. Nick Hayes with you. Great to have your company. I've got a little bit of an Australian icon in front of us today. I've I'd like to say I've grown up with our guest, but we sort of are around the same age. So we sort of have grown into the media landscape, the changes of media over the last 30 odd years. And what a guest she is. She bases herself out of Brisbane. She is the host of 4BC Breakfast, a television icon. Sofie Formica, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That's very kind words. I don't know about icon, but I appreciate it.
I call you icon because I feel like I have seen you on TV for, close to, it seemed like in my earlier days, like when I was going through university, going to school, it just seemed like you were just about everywhere.
Yeah, you're right. Late 80s, early 90s, I did dominate a little bit. There's no doubt about it.
Well, how did it kick off for you? How did it start? Because I've got you down as early as 14 involved in TV.
Yeah, so it's actually 40 years for me. So when I was at high school, one of the girls that I went through school with, her brother was involved with like doing these TV shows for kids via satellite out to sort of regional Queensland. And so a group of us who were like in the elevated English class were allowed to have time out to go to, at the time it was Kelvin Grove, TAFE, and do these satellite programs. It was like a music show. And it was my first taste of sort of being in front of the camera. And my brother is a little bit older than me, and he'd gone through journalism and was working at Channel 7. So between having that first experience through school and then doing work experience up at Channel 7 in grade 10, I was bitten by the bug, and it kind of was the snowball then of all the other decisions that I made to sort of start the career pretty much straight out of high school.
And it was the prime time of television.
It
was when it was really, like we talk about it at the moment around sort of declining audience numbers, the competition that television has for both audience attention, but also the advertising dollars. But that was the golden time.
It was pretty special. I mean, it also had its challenges, and there's plenty of stories that we're really glad there weren't mobile phones around to record forever. But, just last week, every Thursday afternoon, I pop up to Channel 9 and do a piece in the news. And last week I had my daughter with me, my youngest daughter, who's 24. And as we were driving up to Channel 9, and I just said to her, "Oh, honey," I said, "once upon a time, this place was heaving. Like, it was just such an exciting industry to be a part of. And now it's just so very different, and it's everything skeleton staff, robots instead of cameramen. It's a completely different landscape. It's not recognisable, certainly, to those heady days that I remember in the sort of late 80s and early 90s that you and I are reminiscing about.
And we talk about the golden days because I suppose there was a lot more human connection. You talk about robots replacing cameramen, yes, and all of that's there today. But there was a lot of people on set. There were a lot of people involved from the production, the early production, and then post-production would kick in. It would just seem to be one big family. And you would have been the leader of that.
Well, from a production perspective, you're absolutely spot on. I think when you think about how many people were employed and what it meant and how big the industry was, but it was also because we could dominate a particular audience. So the advertising revenue was there to be able to do that. I was looking back over it. We've just recently downsized. And so I was looking back at a whole bunch of old videos, and I had some stuff digitized that I've, this massive box of VHS tapes. I was like, at some point they're just going to disintegrate. And I was, so I was like looking through stuff and trying to just kind of pick bits and pieces to kind of have in a bit of an archive. And there was a show that I did in the early 90s for 7. Larry Emder was the host. It was called The Main Event. And I would be the captain of one team, and Agro was the captain of another team. And then there would be 2 celebrities on either side of us. We would play for an audience at home. So there were 2 live OBs. Larry would be in the middle of this kind of amphitheatre of a live studio audience. And So I watched this show. We gave away a house.
Yes.
Like we were playing for these families, and if they won, a brand new car, like a new Subaru, would pull up in their driveway. I mean, that was, looking back at that, even I was like, wow, that's crazy. I mean, that just doesn't happen anymore. You're lucky if you can get, you know, $500.
Well, they're giving a little bit more on the tipping point these days, but you're spot on. I mean, that's 20,000. We're talking houses.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about, and I suppose the audience numbers there too, because being the fact that there was less competition, it was really, it warranted a house because that was the kind of numbers you were getting.
Absolutely. And I think it was also appointment viewing. It was a time when, I mean, it feels really old fashioned to say that families would sit around together and they'd watch TV together. And in that show in particular, it was mum and dad and the kids sitting on the couch and playing the game. And then, after that, it wasn't long after that I did Just Kidding with Stephen Jacobs on Channel 9. And we were the first show to regularly hit 2 million. Like, I can remember finding an old TV week, and it was like a really big deal for the same reason. It was appointment viewing. And then kind of, when I left Australia and went over to the States, and by the time I came back, the landscape had completely changed. And then reality TV happened, and then it kind of has never been the same since. It's kind of gone down a completely different trajectory, certainly than I can remember in those early days.
A lot of the people I talk to, particularly when reality TV started to kick in, they looked at it with a little bit of disdain, with this is going to kill it, because once you were needed to be trained, you needed to be a professional broadcaster, a professional TV person. Now they're just putting amateurs in a room in a house and doing silly things, and then they become the next broadcaster on an FM station. Did you get a sense and feel of that?
Yeah, I think you're always really protective of sort of what you feel like you've, built up over an extended period of time. There's no point fighting it. It's kind of just the way it is. I think that all coincided just with the notion of celebrity anyway, then that kind of morphed straight out of reality TV into the space of influencer. So it's, it's not the same thing. It's interesting because you just wonder where authenticity comes into it, and everybody can have a voice about whatever they want, which is kind of where we're at the moment. And you're fighting so hard for an audience. Even now when I see people who've tried to move into that podcast space or whatever it might be, it's all about, it's become more about, I think, the outrage, the clickbait and the manipulation of the audience rather than, I think, authentic storytelling. But maybe there's space for both. I just don't know how you make money out of it anymore.
It's interesting. I want to talk about your storytelling because one of many people that I've spoken to that were interviewed by you on your afternoon show on 4BC. I'll come back to that very shortly. But I just want to, while we're still talking about the good old days, you were the first host, female host of Now You See It. You were groundbreaking. You were breaking ground here for women in broadcasting, being the very first host. How did that feel?
It's interesting because now with hindsight and many more years under my belt, while I'm proud of that, I'm still frustrated by the fact that that's as far as it was able to go. I'd been working in kids long the Now You See It thing happened. Yes, it was really great. I was the first sort of official long-standing host of a game show as a female, but it was still 4:30 Monday to Friday, and it was still kids. There were several opportunities where I would go down to Sydney and I would audition for primetime game shows, and we just weren't ready for it. I'm sure, just as capable as the next guy, but it just never happened. And I think part of the reason I left and went to the States was again, in hindsight, a bit of frustration. It's like, well, let me go and spread my wings and see what else is available to me. And when I think about that sort of fork in the road of, if I had stayed in Australia, what would my career have looked like if I had continued to just keep doing shows? Because inevitably your number comes up. If you don't stuff it up and you've got some skill and the audience is attracted to you in that environment, then you kind of, one job goes into another. There's been my peers who've stayed in Australia and who've continued to work and are household names now. I went away and sort of came back to Brisbane, and so it took me down a completely different path. But it was frustrating at the time that I never got that break to be able to do that kind of a job in prime time. It just, no one was ready for that idea. It had to be the formula that they still, pretty much stick to. I mean, Rebecca Gibney is probably the one that springs to mind now. She's doing Millionaire Hot Seat. We had can't remember her name because it's just escaped me. But there hasn't been many other women who've stepped into that role.
There hasn't been, but would it also have been different had you been Sydney-based or Melbourne-based? Could that have helped? Because Queensland and Brisbane might have been a little bit, was it, because look, let's face it, Queensland was the game show central for most. I still, what was the Channel 10 one? The Now You See It? No, sorry, not Now You See It.
They did. It's a Knockout. Was up.
It's a Knockout. That's the one.
There were a few. We were certainly more the kids' show capital. I think even more so than the game show capital.
Sure.
I moved to Sydney around the time that I did a bit of a stint on Home and Away, and then during that sort of period of doing Just Kidding, just before Just Kidding, I would go down to Melbourne to do a lot of Vizard. So I did live in Sydney for a little while, but certainly moving back to Australia after being gone for a few years and working over there, when we decided to move back to Brisbane and ended up staying here because this is where our family is, absolutely 100%, Nick. I made a choice to be a mum. And yeah, you're in Brisbane, you might as well be on the moon.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, and that's kind of why I ended up doing the shows here that were more in travel and in Brisbane, lifestyle travel programs for Channel 7, and which I did for 15, 16 years. I was able to be a working mum and raise my family.
Beautiful, beautiful work. Well done. And it's the same feeling, I think, a lot of the people we talk to with, if you're Perth-based, if you're Adelaide-based,
Yeah.
you kind of, if you're not in Melbourne or Sydney, you're basically camping in the media landscape world. All right. Last one I just wanted to cover off with you because it wasn't your fault, but you did serve as the last host for Wombat for its last year. Gorgeous program, What happened to Wombat?
Yeah, that was an interesting one too. And you're right. I really thought I was stuffed because I had started my degree and then I got offered Wombat, and I was replacing Gail and Gillian Blakeney, the Blakeney twins. They were leaving to go to the UK. They'd started their acting and they then ended up on Neighbours and recording music. And so they sent me off to Africa with the World Wildlife Fund, and I filmed all of these stories, and it was supposed to be like my first year on Wombat, and it was going to be all these stories of Africa peppered with other things from around Australia. And pretty much I got home from that trip and we found out the show had been canned. It was not a cheap show to make. I think that was probably part of it. And then I was freaking out because I lied to my mum. I told mum that I'd deferred from uni, which was not true. I quit. And thankfully, over that Christmas period, Buena Vista International did the deal to bring Saturday Disney to Australia. And so I stayed with Seven and I sort of was tipped out of Wombat and into Saturday Disney as a presenter and a producer. Now, the upside of that was that I was probably one of the last of my ilk to go through a cadetship of sorts. You know, we had to edit, we had to write, we had to learn on the job, and I never finished my uni degree. Like I never went back and finished uni. I just kind of then kept working. And, you know, here we are 40 years later.
You're kicking and still working and still working. Now, your transformation over to radio, a brilliant one, because I know I just sort of prefaced it earlier around your interview style and skills. I've never had someone sort of literally reach out to me and say, oh, my God, Sofie Formica, best interview I've ever done. It's just that you probably go a step above your average interviewer. You really engage them. And I think probably, if anything, you're really listening to the actual interview and taking it on. Is this a skill that you've built, or is it this just you?
I think that's very kind, first of all. Thank you. And I can remember actually, because you would pitch a lot of stories to us, and I do remember you sending me a really lovely note, and I appreciate it. I think it's two things. I did a lot of that work in the States. The TV shows that I made over there, I was a bit of a one-man band for one of them in particular, and so there was a lot there. It comes from, I think, genuinely being interested in people and in stories. And the transition to radio was really accidental. I had been working on these TV shows in Brisbane, loving them. We had a change of management. I didn't feel like it was where I wanted to be any longer. So I made that decision to walk away from doing those shows. I just felt like they'd kind of run their course for me. And I was desperately trying to get up an ecotourism travel program. I thought Australia really was, and still is to a degree, where were the deeper, more meaningful travel opportunities in our country? You can go anywhere in the world and drink an expensive drink by the pool, cocktail by the pool, but we've got some really exceptional experiences that are unique to our country. And so who was going to highlight those? And just as I was kind of trying to get legs around that, COVID happened.
Yeah.
And the rug was pulled out from under everybody, and making a new TV show was not on the agenda. And Channel 9 at that point had just bought up all of the news talk programs. So 2GB, 3AW, 6PR in Perth, and 4BC in Brisbane. It's a legacy media company in this state. My brother had worked for 4BC after he had worked in TV for some of the best broadcasters. So I was really familiar with radio, but I had never really worked in radio. And yes, you transfer skills, but it's completely different. And so when the afternoons program slot came up and they were going to start doing more local programming, I thought, why not? It actually was literally my 50th birthday when I got that job, and I thought there's not many chances to reinvent yourself at the age of 50. So what's the worst thing that can happen? And at the end of the day, who really gives if it doesn't work? Which is kind of still my attitude. And then we've had a lot of changes. We've just become Tapt, as you alluded to. And at the beginning of this year, there was more programming changes and an opportunity for me to step into breakfast. And I thought, why not? Now I'm 55 in a couple of weeks. And we're rebuilding, I think, the breakfast audience. It's not an easy task to do at all, but I really enjoy it. And I miss those long form interviews that I did in the afternoon, I will say. That's one thing that I don't get to do as much of. And maybe, who knows what happens next. Maybe I'll get a chance to do it again.
The afternoon does allow for a longer form, but the breakfast program is a lot earlier, a lot soundbite, a little bit more energy, I suppose, in many ways. And that's probably, that would fit your persona, fit you personally?
Breakfast or afternoons?
Yeah.
I'm just making sure I'm not about to run out of battery. Don't tell anybody my technology. I'm plugged in, but I'm getting a red line. So anyway, talk faster.
Well, you fix that technology up as you go, but I'll just sort of walk through the difference between obviously an afternoon program and a morning breakfast program is going to be a lot more different energies levels and setting the agenda for the day. Has that been a bit of a switch over? And you probably don't get to do that long form Q&A with people that you can really dive deep into, which, by the way, I think there's a big appetite for long form, even though we are seem to getting into these snack size, bite size, click-throughs, clickbait type style content. There is an appetite for long form now.
It's interesting because I wonder sometimes if I've missed the boat for podcasting. Like, I've talked about it with so many different people, and what would it look like, and how would I do it, and who would I do it with, and I don't know. The market is just so saturated. Notwithstanding this very good podcast that you're doing, the other thing with breakfast is that there's two of us, so you go from doing 3 hours of afternoons by yourself, where you really also rely then on those interviews to be the other voice with you, to hosting breakfast as a duo. So I don't find it anywhere near as mentally taxing because I've got somebody to share it with, and it just happens to be someone who I've been friends with for 20 years. So it's a very easy breakfast program, but the content is different and the interviews are definitely shorter. There's no doubt about it. And it is more energetic and it is agenda setting. But we're moving away from, if you're listening in Sydney, it's not 2GB, it's much more 3AW in its style. So the interviews are shorter, the content is a balance of news and politics, but also just a lot more life-based rather than news-based.
And I think that's the challenge there for 4BC. We had a bit of a moment there where it was piping in a lot of its content from Sydney, from interstate, which kind of, if we know that the formula with talk radio is very successful when it's local and live. It has to be someone on the ground that knows and understands. When we start to work with shows that are interstate, and we've seen that across the ABC where they've piped in shows that just don't work. And 4BC bringing that back, though, I think was really, really sort of a not so much a brave, but a needed moment there, because there was programs coming in from Sydney that I'm pretty certain Queenslanders would not have put up with.
Yeah, well, they say, if you turn on a breakfast program, you should be able to listen for 5 minutes and know what city you're in. And that's kind of how we've viewed the content that we're choosing to put on. For us, as I said, we're back in growth phase because there's just been so many changes over a short period of time. The audience doesn't like that. And so, how do you then give them something that you feel is a nice smorgasbord of that kind of content? But if they've gone and sampled elsewhere, when do they come back? And the upside for us is that we are certainly attracting a slightly younger demographic, which is great. And I think that you're right. When it comes to that live and local content, you become a real sounding board and a litmus test for what's important to people at this time. And so that part I really am loving. And it certainly feels that way when I talk to people who listen to the show. And you remember that you're also a companion for so many people when you're in that kind of a format as well. It's a reason why they choose to be on News Talk and not listening to the radio for music. And then you add the technology to that too, Nick. And a lot of it now is also the change to listening on the app. People aren't listening on analog anymore. And so that then affects how it's measured. Are people streaming? Where are they when they're streaming? They're listening on the internet. There's definitely upheaval. There's no doubt about it. It's like riding a wave that you have no control over.
Well, so true, so true. The platforms have certainly changed. The content, I don't think, has changed. The formula hasn't necessarily changed a lot over the time. It's funny you say that because I listen to 3AW religiously for the breakfast program. I'm listening across to 2GB. I'm catching you guys on 4BC and 6PR in Perth. I even listen to 5AA here in Adelaide on my app as well because I can't be bothered going to my radio to turn it on. I'm listening to it on my phone. So it's a different world. The type of stories that you like to tell. What are the stories that get Sofie Formica interested in to sink your teeth into?
I think I've always had a leaning towards the stuff where you're learning something. I think that we're at such a point in time where there's so many advancements in so many different areas. And so where do you give people agency over their own lives in whatever it might be, whether it's their financial security and future, what they're doing with their life and their career, the raising of their families, their relationships, their health. That's probably been a big one for me, and one that I would gravitate towards even with the pitches that would come from you guys, that, we've really given up so much of our power and control over allowing other people to dictate for us. So how do you then give people permission through those conversations to say, have a vested interest in the decisions that you're making for yourself and your family? Know that you have control and power over that, the same way that you have control and power over the content that you're consuming and where you're getting it from, and is it a trusted source? And so this whole pendulum swing at the moment of just being so much out there, it's like, how do you then distill that so that the conversations you're having, you feel are authentic and actually are based in some kind of security that what you're talking about is real and not imagined and not manipulated. I just feel like we're being manipulated so much. So they're the conversations that I like, the ones that feel real.
Yeah, so I love that. I really do. I think it's and I think you can tell from the audience and the feel from and the responses back that that's what you genuinely do like, because not just the people that have commented to us, but also just the audience numbers that will come to you and be drawn to those real life stories. I think that's so critical. Sophie, what do you make? I think one of the successful aspects of a 3AW Ross and Russell, 3AW Ross Stevenson to me is the god of talk radio, particularly for breakfast. But
Yeah,
he has been, because he's got a couple of he is. It is almost ludicrous that he doesn't hold a Hall of Fame. But one of the things he always like,
here, Nick, because I'm gonna die on you.
You check.
Do that.
You check the plug in. I'll keep talking. This is the beauty of live cut.
Plug yourself into a cord that's not plugged into the wall. What is the issue?
There you go. That's
colleagues love this. I did a show in 1999 with Oprah called Oprah Goes Online, where I literally taught Oprah how to use a computer. And they think that's freaking hilarious because, as you can see, I'm not exactly the most reliable when it comes to being tech savvy. So I'm unplugging this one, replugging this other one. Sorry, keep talking. There we go.
You keep fixing it up, and I think it's a good thing that you're a good broadcaster, because as far as a tech or a IT person, don't start thinking about that as a role. But one of the great things about Ross Stevenson and his lines that he will, and I suppose to the degrees of levels of his programming that he will put on, he won't talk politics. And, in Victoria, obviously state politics is a big thing. Federal politics is dominating as well. What's your view on politics? Because Queensland politics have been very interesting over the last 5 or 6 years. And look what we've got with this One Nation coming through. It is a hard time for Australians to grapple what is going on.
And not everyone's interested. I mean, we do talk about politics. It's kind of, it's interesting because I think a lot of people assume that we're told what to think or what to say, which is not true. I decided to take a leaf out of Greg Carey's book, even when I was on afternoons, and I'd like to think even now that if you listen to me as a broadcaster, you're not 100% sure how I would vote. I don't wear it on my sleeve. I'm not a card-carrying member of any political party. I think I'm equally disappointed across the board a lot of the time by what's been served up, but we can't avoid it. We aren't politics heavy. We don't do a lot of politicians, for example, but sometimes there are things that I'd really like clarity around. So even today, for example, we did put a call in to have the Deputy Premier on because there was a piece of legislation that was going to change without really an understanding of why. And I just would have loved his voice to give a bit of an explanation as to why he felt it was really important that they would do this. Now, I actually think it's not a bad idea. What they want to do essentially is give him additional powers so that they can fast track projects in the lead up to the games. But some of them will also be for critical mining, others might be for ecotourism, and I get that. It's like, how can you on one hand be demanding more of the politicians of the day to get things happening and yet know that they've got so much bureaucracy and red tape and green tape and blue tape and all the tape that prevents that from happening quickly. So sometimes I think there is reason for that, but a lot of the time there's not. And I still am not 100% convinced that Brisbane wants a lot of politics. And you're right. I think that at the moment, the political landscape is so divisive that you either are for me or against me. You're either with me or you're not. If there's a word that I hate and it gets used all the time, even by my colleagues, it's woke, because I don't think that woke necessarily has to be the label that you give to anyone who might be socially conscious or might be progressive in the way that they feel that life should unfold, but you get given that moniker as soon as you say you're not ultra conservative. And so this whole pushing to the left and right means there's less real discussion and there's very little space for nuance.
Yeah. Look, I blame social media for all of this. I think a lot of it is just that everyone seems to have a say, and they think that their say is more important, where it used to be we'd have these discussions in the pub, or we'd have these discussions in smaller groups where it wasn't necessarily amplified to levels where people started to jump into their silos. But look, we'll leave that one for another day. Sofie, I'd love you're going to be attending our Meet the Media next month in July. I'm looking forward to having it. In fact, from my understanding, you'll have to jump off air, head straight to the car, get straight into Brizzy, and start to talk to the peeps. What do you know about the event? What are you expecting? And or is it just a blank canvas for you? I've no idea.
I hope I haven't just told all my stories and I've got nothing to contribute on the day.
No, you have. No, I'll be asking a couple of similar questions to you. But I suppose, how often would you get an opportunity, for instance, to be able to have a chat to leaders of industry or business to just sit down and talk about what you do and find out what they're doing?
Fairly regularly. A few years ago, I was fortunate enough to be invited onto the board of the Brisbane Economic Development Agency. So I do a lot of that other work outside of the broadcasting stuff. And I still have a handful of events that I will either participate in as a moderator for a panel, or as part of a panel, or in that MC capacity, particularly around the area of interest to me, which remains that sort of tourism, economic development, investment opportunities for the city, like those kinds of things. I still do a fair bit. I don't talk about myself in those environments, but I do talk about the ideas and what the vision looks like and how we take people along the journey. I think the other thing that you become responsible for when you do shows about your city is not everyone likes change. Not everybody wants there to be, more houses, and the argument over what migration should be and how development happens and where it happens. But the reality is, for us, you live in a big city that's growing and changing and is about to host, this massive sporting event, which is a springboard for all the other great stuff that can happen, not without its challenges. So, they're always interesting conversations, and I love being a part of them. I genuinely do. So next week, or the week after, I'm doing one that's about that. It's about festivals specifically, how you attract them, what they do to your city.
They are, festivals. You're talking. I'm talking from Adelaide, the city of festivals. We try to claim that. I'm not sure whether we're necessarily winning it over Queensland, but we do it. I think we bat above our average there, particularly with our premier, who loves an event. Hey, what did hit home with me earlier on in our conversation was you, as a mum, being able to raise your children in the broadcast industry, and that wouldn't have been so easy, I suppose, in many ways, in that it is tough for females, particularly in a broadcasting space. You only have to see the unfortunate that Channel 7 just in recent times has let go a lot of staff, and those that were on maternity leave even. What was that like for you to be able to raise the children? Was it the priority family first and make that happen and work? And did work allow you to do it?
I think that there's never a one-size-fits-all approach to this. And I think that we sometimes try to have these sweeping statements. I don't believe that there's such a thing as work-life balance. And I don't believe in that either. And I don't believe, and this is a bit controversial, I guess, I don't think that you can have it all, not at the same time anyway. At some point, something else has to give. And for my family and for my situation, we were fortunate that I could step out completely. I had worked really hard in America, and that set us up and gave us a little bit of freedom, so that when we came home, I made a decision to stay at home with the kids when they were little. Then we had Emily. She was a bit of a surprise. So I had 3 kids under 3. So, I wanted to be at home with them. There was really not a question. So I stepped out of work completely for about 6 years. I didn't work. The last job I did in America in 99 was the Oprah gig. It was literally October of 99. I had the twins in 2000. We moved home to Australia. I had Emily in 2002. And then I went back to work in about 2006. And when I went back to work, it was to 7, and I would work 1 or 2 days a week max. And did that mean that I probably missed out on professional opportunities? Absolutely. I don't have a beach house because I didn't work for a really long time. But my husband was working and earning enough money that I didn't need to feel that pressure, which was, not a second do I regret that. And now I've got 2 26-year-olds and a 24-year-old. We're a really tight family, and it's the stuff that really matters, isn't it?
Oh, it is the stuff that really matters. Absolutely. What advice would you give to a younger Sofie Formica now, like just going into media and launching in, knowing what you know now? If there was one bit of advice you could take your younger self and go, hey, pull up on this or give this a go, what would you be saying?
Well, she would have invested in Amazon. I literally spent an entire day in a green room with Jeff Bezos around the time that he was still just selling books online and talking about expanding the business. And
wow.
I think that I just would have gone, you know what, mate, I'll just kick you a couple of bucks. There were many missed opportunities from that perspective because we were there. We were there in San Francisco. I was making TV shows about this thing called the internet, and nobody knew what was going to happen next. And I can remember when we got to the sort of the third year of me working with CNET, you didn't even want to get paid. You just like, just pay me in options. Like, don't worry about a salary. That was pretty extraordinary. I'm really lucky, Nick. I don't feel like she missed out on anything.
Yeah.
There's forks in the road that are presented to everybody, and you can't die wondering. And so I took risks and I left. If I'd stayed here, who knows what would have happened, but I wouldn't have had 7 years of exploring the other side of the world and having that experience. And that was the beginning of my marriage too. So, you always know you're testing yourself if you're living your first years of your married life away from your family and nowhere to go when you get pissed off and you have a fight. And we're still, 32 years. So, no, I don't regret anything.
Well done. Well done, you. That is outstanding. I think amazing career. And it really, you just said it before, you're 50, coming up to 55 now. And I think podcasting, if Carl Stefanovic can go and do it, Sofie Formica can do it.
I don't know. I'm not controversial. If you want just really nice conversations, maybe. I just don't know if that's going to make any money for anybody. I don't think that I hope my TV days aren't behind me. I still, I miss it. I'm not going to lie. I love radio and I want to see success in the show that we're doing for breakfast. But I'm also in that real sweet spot for probably what is the next growth opportunity, and that is this whole wellness, longevity, aging space. And I say to people all the time, 55 on me looks vastly different to what it did to my mum and not recognisable to my grandmother. We are aging in a very different way now. And so I look at 55 and think, well, I don't intend on not working in 10 years just because I'm 65. So who knows what can happen in the next, in the next bit, whether it's something like that or going back to acting, who knows?
Oh, look, and you might be back on Home and Away. How does that show keep going when Neighbours falls off? It is remarkable, that show.
Yeah, we could start a campaign to bring back Imogen Miller.
Imogen Miller.
The bitch.
The bitch, bring her back.
Yeah.
But you know what? I think that the world does need a lot more. It needs a lot more decent conversations, and I think don't worry about the controversial, Mark. There's always a space for that. The Joe Rogans, the Carl Stefanovic. I'm always fascinated watching the way that he's going about it. But I think there's a place for everything. And I think to be able to commercialize it and put it out there, podcasting is incredibly powerful at the moment and doing its thing. Sofie, thanks for joining us on the Experts Podcast. We're so looking forward to seeing you in Brisbane at the Meet the Media event. I do have people flying up from Melbourne and Sydney to come and see you. So it's...
Oh, that's not true. They're not coming for me. They're coming for you.
No, they're coming for you. Well, I just ask the questions. They want to hear from you and telling the stories the way it is. I think if there's one thing that we really want to understand, and I think that's slightly lost in many things, is that we have lost that human contact and content that hasn't necessarily towed the line over the last decade. Because since COVID, we don't mind being a little bit more separated. We don't mind being a little bit more isolated. But in times when we need to be together. So it's a time to do that. And that's in Brisbane for Meet the Media late July. Hey, Sofie, thank you for joining the Experts Podcast. If people want to reach out to you or get in contact, what's the best way to do it to get to you?
Yeah, Sofie at sofieformica.com, and that's the website too. If you just put Sofie Formica in, it takes you there, and you can send me an email. I'm easy to find. My socials are, I'm just Sofie with an F. So
yeah, Sofie with an F-I-E. Sofie, F-O-I-E. Excellent. Sofie, great to have you on the show. And thank you. And thank you for your service and time in media, because it's to date, you've done an amazing job. I'm looking forward to the next 20, 25 years here. It's I think you've got some exciting things in front of you.
Thank you. That's very, very kind. And I do really appreciate you not only making the effort to have the conversation with me and invite me along to your event, but it means the world that you've had some really positive feedback for the people you work with. So thanks.
They adore you. We look forward to seeing you there at Meet the Media, and we look forward to having you back in your ears next week when we talk to another expert or another media. We'll talk to you then.
Bye.